Hi everyone. I have something a little bit more lighthearted for the end of the year. I may have mentioned before that my dad is the archetype of an ISTJ. He's the ISTJ's ISTJ. And the reason I say that as a good example is that he was getting himself a degree through night school and was required to take an English composition class as part of his degree. And one of the things he had to do for that was a creative writing project that was fairly open-ended. And he decided that for that project, he would write about how to change your car's engine oil. Well, INFPs are sort of the flip side of the same functions of the ISTJ. So my dad and I are two sides of the same coin, I think. And because of that, I played with that idea and thought, well, what if I flip this on its head? Because there have been things talked about how to change your engine oil, but nobody really talks about how engine oil changes you. So I thought perhaps I could be the first, or maybe one of the fewer, that talks about how engine oil changes you. And so, without further ado, this is all historical, but that means that some of the stuff is not going to be relevant anymore. Probably most of it's not relevant anymore, but the structure still matters. And so, you start out with you're a teenager, some are in your later teens, and living in a rural area. Cars are a necessity if you're going to be working or doing pretty much anything, because your friends, your work, whatever it might be, is going to be 20, 30, 40 minutes away by car. That means that the car is a necessity at some point. And if you're not able to afford something like that on your own, there will come a time that there's going to be friends, brothers, cousins, grandmothers, other cousin that happens to get a newer car, and then that shifts the older one down hands, and there's a successive series of hand-me-downs that can then end up with your buddy getting a slightly newer rust bucket, and then the old jalopy falling into your hands. So with that sort of provenance, that sort of gift kind of coming out of nowhere for free or nominal cost, suddenly you have a car. But with that car comes a lot of other weights. And that is, there's the insurance costs and the requirement for an inspection. And then the car may not have everything working properly. It needs some maintenance. And so before you know it, after talking insurance, you're $400, $500 in the hole. And then after everything else is done, maybe another 100, 150. Get the title sorted out and all those other fun things. Never mind your time and the aggravation. But indeed, at the end of it, you have a 1 ton, 1.5 ton, or heavier monstrosity that's sitting in your driveway that you can uniquely call yours. Either before you try to pass inspection as sort of a ritual to try and placate the car gods, that things will go your way in inspection, or afterwards as a sort of a sacrifice or tribute to having successfully passed and can get on with your driving experiences. There will be a time that you'll need to change the oil. And once upon a time, this was a frequent thing, because back in the day before synthetic oil, you were supposed to change your engine oil once every, 1,500, 2,000, 2,500 miles, not every 5 or 10,000. So this was a regular ritual, maybe once every season or so, if you ended up driving frequently. And because of the aforementioned costs of insurance and inspection and the maintenance things, getting tires and who knows what else, there's not a lot of money left over to go down to, I think back then we also had a Jiffy Lube or those places to ask them to do it for you. What you end up doing is finding 4 quarts for $1.89 a pop and figure out through one of these big cross-reference manuals what your oil filter is for this particular car, and then buy one of those for $5 or $6 from Fram or someone else, and then put it all together. You're maybe a little bit shy of $20 in the hole, and off you go on your adventure of changing the oil. So there's no jacking up the car, because if you jack up the car, then it can fall down. So you just set the emergency brake, put it in the most level place on the driveway you can find on the asphalt, and then you wriggle your 6 foot, 120 pound nothing frame underneath that thing, going nose to undercarriage, or in places where the undercarriage gets too low for the nose, duck sideways and try to see if you can get to a point where you can straighten out your head to see what's going on in the engine block. And you can feel your way around to the oil pan where, yes, indeed, there's a bolt there. And it looks like it's a hex bolt. Well, you don't have your own tools being a teenager. However, that's what ISTJ dads are for. You know your ISTJ dad has every tool known to humanity and some that you don't even know why they exist or what purpose they have. And everything is properly put in its place, of course. Which means that it's going to be your job, your duty, if you choose to accept it, to get into the toolboxes and pull out a socket set, which you'll inevitably put back wrong or out of order or forget, put in the wrong place, but that's in the future. You go grab that, maybe a couple of rags, because you might realize that this is going to be a dirty job, and then crawl your way underneath the undercarriage, pull yourself to the point where you're by the oil pan, and start feeling around with the sockets to see which one fits. Maybe it's a 3/4 or a 9/16 or a 1/2 or 7/8, and eventually settle on the 9/16. Seems to be the right fit for the socket. And so you get out the socket wrench, pop everything together, and manage to leverage your 120 pound nothing body to get the socket onto the oil pan bolt. Test for fit, and then you give it a pull, and then you realize that there's such a thing as torque, and whoever had put that thing down last had put so many foot-pounds on that thing, it's within an inch of its life, and your 120 pound nothing frame is not going to be able to pull that off. So here you are with both hands on the socket and the very far point that you can get it, thinking up curse words that are very adult and trying to pull and realizing that, well, maybe I've got this lefty-loosey, righty-tighty thing wrong. And so you end up playing with it a little bit this way and that before you realize, okay, yes, I'm upside down, so counterclockwise is this way, so I am doing it right after all. It's just a matter of tenacity. And so after crawling out and back down once or twice and pulling on that thing with all your might, eventually it gives. And with it, you manage suddenly to wrench it loose enough that it can be unscrewed with just the fingers. So you get back out and put the socket set away. That is, you throw it all into the socket box and figure out, socket wrench box, and you figure out what to do with it later. And get an oil pan to put underneath get an oil bucket. I forget what they call those things, but basically place a pan underneath the socket, and then with your fingers sort of magically figure out how to get in there between the low and high points to unscrew the bolt for the oil pan until, of course, it gives way, letting loose a gusher of jet black liquid that gets all over your hands. The bolt falls into the oil pan because, of course, it would. And then you end up with a great big sticky mess on your hands, but thankfully, most of it's going into the oil pan. There's nothing on the asphalt, thank goodness, because ISTJ Dad would not appreciate that. And so you've managed to accomplish the first part of the mission. Managed to fish that bolt back out with your hands, with your fingers, because everything is already filthy in that hand anyway, covered in grease and film. And once you have the bolt and the pan is sufficiently drained, you manage to finagle that back on again. Hand tighten it just for the moment. You'll take care of that later. And then congratulate yourself on your success. Move the oil pan back out, and then realize that you still have to change the filter. Where is the filter? Well, back under the undercarriage. And you manage, with one hand feeling around, you find a way to get into a hidden crevice behind the engine block, where some engineer had thought it would be the ideal place to put an oil filter because it is almost unreachable by human hands. And then, even though you've used rags or paper towels to try and clean off everything, there's enough residue that, try as you might, you find that the same person who torqued down that bolt had done the same with the oil filter. And there is just no way in God's green earth that you can get at this thing and manage to successfully get it off with your hands. It's just slipping by. Now, there are specialty tools, thank goodness, that one can use that are like little caps that you put on the back of the filter and then use those to twist them off. But of course, the filter you've got doesn't match any of the caps, which you find out after 2 or 3 trips between your car and the toolbox. And more of a mess of tools accrues by the car, which again, ISTJ Dad will all need to be dealt with later. Finally, having given up that there's no specific tool you can use to take that thing off, you remember that there is this magical thing that maybe a brother or a friend or your dad or someone had done before when something got stuck with an oil filter. And you remember that you can take a screwdriver and a hammer, punch that through, and manage to get it through to the oil filter, and that way put a handle on the edge that you'd be able to use as a lever to wrest the filter off. And so here we find that, yes, from the top of the engine block you can barely see and get in there with a screwdriver, and after more trips back and forth, hoping that your dad might not get too upset that you're about to get one of his large screwdrivers very dirty and greasy, plus a mallet, plus maybe some other instruments of destruction, you head back to your car, manage successfully to punch a hole through that oil filter from the top, and it gives enough leverage that you can get in there to start the process of getting it off, at least to pull it loose. And then you realize that the oil filter was full of oil and it's dripping all over the driveway. So, finding some new curse words, you slip your way underneath with a rag, with paper towels, whatever you can gather up, and start dabbing away at the mess that you've just created, knowing that this is something that's going to be a problem you will hear about later from ISTJ Dad, because there's no way he's not going to notice this new oil stain on the driveway. But you do the best you can to clean up the mess that you've made. And on the bright side, thankfully, with that additional leverage, you were able to wrest the oil filter loose and pull the screwdriver back out, crawl back in from the bottom for the umpteenth time, and now manage to wrest the old one loose until it, of course, falls down, creating a great big greasy mess. The new oil filter is not so hard to get on. With a little bit of oil for sealant, fresh oil for sealant, it can be, after some cursing and fishing around in the hidden crevice, it finds its way home, and you tighten it down, not as crazy tight as the last person who had it, and then tighten down the bolts, put in the fresh oil, and with a big sigh of relief, after having caused a great big mess, you are completed with your engine oil task, covered in oil that smells like gas, that leaves a filmy residue no matter how much you try to clean the stuff off. You will realize that as a teenager, you have just undergone this ritual that is a responsibility that lies somewhere between, you've conducted it as a young adult, but the ritual is an adult one. And it involves real money and real maintenance and real responsibility. And so through this ritual of changing the oil, you have also changed yourself into a step closer to being an actual adult. Of course, later on, when ISTJ Dad does catch that big new oil stain on the asphalt driveway, you will need to claim child privileges to lack of responsibility, lack of foresight, whatever will help get you off the hook for the mess that you've made. And of course, there will be other irritation by ISTJ Dad when he realizes that the socket set is not back where it's supposed to be. When it is found, there's like one piece missing. The screwdriver is still covered with a slight filmy, oily residue. Nothing has been done quite the way that ISTJ Dad would have done it. But yet, you have accomplished this adult thing and made a step closer in achieving this freedom, this low-margin freedom of working for $4.25 an hour, trying to make back the hundreds of dollars that you've sunk into this venture to try and run this jalopy for as long as it's willing to have you, until it too wears out, gives out the ghost, and it can no longer be resuscitated by going to the rotting husks and junkyards and trying to find cheap replacement parts because the real thing is too expensive. So that is life, a very small piece of it. And I don't know if any of this is useful or made any sense, but I am trying to say something about the flip side of the ISTJ, because there are the steps involved, and then there's the humanity that's involved over the steps. And I hope that we all retain our humanity in those moments, and that it isn't just about finding new adult-sounding curse words, but also finding some sense of progress or some sense of moving forward in life in these rituals that we take on as we grow older. And that's all I got. Bye for now.